we are going to discuss social cognition today. Social cognition is part of our Psychology 202 class, and most of our reading is coming out of the textbook Social Psychology and Christian Perspective. And so today what we're going to be discussing is two different parts. The first one is social cognition, and the second one is going to be on culture. Social cognition is important because it is a subgroup of social psychology that focuses specifically on how humans process, store, and then apply information about others and social situations. So part one of this presentation today is going to be on web-based social cognitions. What I related this to mostly was social media, because I feel like with my generation and the generation after me, social media has become the main way to communicate with other people. Even when kids are at school, or if you go out to eat and you look around, most people are on their cell phones and not interacting face to face. And so how does social cognition, how is it affected by the web or cyberspace, basically, and the cyber world? And so the two that I used is Facebook and Instagram. And these two social media outlets, I would say, are used most often. I believe Instagram is number one now, ahead of Facebook and Twitter. And when somebody says a name or is talking about somebody else and you do not recognize the name, most often what people do, they will jump on their social media app and they will look that person up. And so if you don't recognize them by their name, you may recognize them by face. If not, you begin looking through their page and you begin to form an opinion about that person. I am guilty of doing this. And so the question was, do people make the same judgments on the internet, social media, and through text as they do face to face? I think that we form very strong opinions about people based on the things that they're posting, or maybe even their verbiage that they use under the picture to explain what they are doing. And so if somebody cusses a lot or is posting very promiscuous photos, we assume the worst possibly about that person. And so what are the cultural differences that drive social cognition? So Julian, on the TED Talk that we watched this week, spoke on the different cultures. And he used the Norwegian culture versus where he came from, which is the French-speaking part of Canada. And so he was discussing how in Canada, they will interact and speak to each other, but in Norway, that is not common. And so what I related it to was in my area in Farmington, New Mexico, we are saturated with the Native American culture. The biggest differences between us and them, I have a couple here listed. When you have a brand new baby, the first snow of their life, you take them outside and you unwrap them. They're completely naked and you roll them in the snow. To me, as a mom, I am mortified by that because I just think, oh my gosh, how miserable. And so, but to them, it is something cultural that they do to introduce their babies to the elements of the earth. Also, when you have a baby, you either send your placenta off and it is put into capsules so that you can digest it, or you bring it home with you and then they bury it, and it is making your baby's life at one with the earth. The other thing is that in the Native American culture, it is very rude to make eye contact with people, whereas in my culture, it is very rude not to look somebody in the eye, where we suggest that if you are not looking at us in the eye, when we're speaking to you, that you're disrespecting or you are not listening. So obviously, I don't think that there is a culture that is the same. I think there's variations in every culture, which makes us all so unique and so interesting to learn about. I listed some different ones. In the textbook, the author discusses the Japanese culture versus the American culture, or the Western culture, and she suggests that in the Japanese culture, successes are not spoken of, but the failures are more focused on, whereas in the United States, obviously, You can look at somebody's Facebook page and see all of the wonderful things that they do, but very rarely do you ever see anything negative posted about that person. So this is the second part of our presentation, and I chose the Chinese culture to compare to the American culture. And socially, we are very different than the Chinese. They have a hierarchy and different social classes, and you do not intertwine between the different social classes. And so I would consider myself to be middle class. But I do have friends that are extremely wealthy, and I have family members that are extremely wealthy, and I also have the other side that I would say are living in poverty. That does not separate us from hanging out with each other or being around one another. It may affect our social life, but it does not affect friendships. The other thing is, in China, obviously the government controls most of what they do, whereas in the United States, we are a free country, and the government is controlling more and more, I feel like, each day, but it's not to the same extent as the Chinese. Respect for the elderly. I wish that this is one of the ones that the United States would adopt from China. And it basically says is that the older somebody becomes, the more wise they become, and also the more respected that they are to the younger generation. And then public reputation is obviously very important in China, and they even have something that is called the social credit system, and that is the more socially acceptable your reputation is, the better you behave, the more credits you get. And in parentheses, you can see that I put drunk posting, because when I speak to students, it's no longer about when you get drunk, the things that you do, but about the things that you post. And so I would say that our reputations can change from day to day or from seasons to seasons as we grow and learn, I guess, through those things. The humility in the Chinese culture, they downplay their successes. And I, again, will say that if you look at somebody's social media page, you will see how fabulous their life is, but very rarely would you ever see somebody post the negatives of their life. So I have to wonder, although I'm not surprised by anything, I learned based on what I have heard about the Chinese culture, but I do wonder why so many people come to the United States if their attributes are considered so much better than ours. When I was looking through the articles, it's almost as though many of them perceived other cultures to be much better than ours, yet so many people want to come and be a part of it, and I believe it's because we come from the greatest country on the planet. But I wish that we could just look openly and without judgment at all of the different cultures and take different lessons from each one to make us even better. I think there's so much that we could learn from every single culture. My perception of the Chinese culture did not change, but I will have to say that as I study this book and as I begin to look into social psychology, I'm actually beginning to hope that maybe my pathway would take me down the psychology, Christian psychology path as I get out of school. I think it's so interesting to study people in different cultures. Here are my references, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation.